In this video, I'm showing you how I was inspired by these oyster mushrooms to make these magical creatures. Not only am I showing you just how I made one of my most complex sculptures ever, but I'll also be visiting my husband's mushroom farm to get inspiration and learn all about these crazy cool fungi. So a few years ago, I made an illustration of a family of oyster mushroom creatures that I've always wanted to turn into a sculpture. They're wild oyster mushrooms, and they're traditionally found on dead trees and fallen logs. The problem is, this year on my foraging hikes, I haven't found any to use as references for my sculpture. So the next best thing I can do is head over to my husband's farm. I just so happen to be married to a mushroom farmer. Oh yeah, and before we take a ride, if you're digging the vibe, consider a subscribe. My husband has been growing mushrooms for over a decade. Let's go talk to Ben about some oyster mushrooms.
Oyster mushrooms are cool. They grow in clusters and get their name from their oyster-like appearance and shape of their caps. On our farm, we use supplemented sawdust in mushroom grow bags to create an ideal environment so that we can grow them year-round.
Thanks to Ben, I've got a really nice cluster and I'm ready to head back into the studio to get to work. I've got all my reference materials and now I'm ready to plan out and implement the sculpture. So I'm going to sculpt a base that looks like the mushrooms are growing from a piece of bark. So I used my references and bulked out the shape with tin foil. I'm using Cosclay, which is a polymer clay made with rubber, so the final product is durable and flexible. I'm adding the bark texture and building up the scratchy, scrapey details. The outer bark of a tree is actually the tree's protective layer. It helps keep the tree from getting too wet, too dry, too hot, or too cold, basically keeping that inner wood just right. It helps defend against insects and critters as well. I'm also adding texture and details to the back to give it an inner bark look, though this piece will be hung on a wall so you won't see this part very often. And then I sketch out where I might have these mushrooms coming out of the wood, and now you know what time it is, folks. It's time for power tools. Now that the holes are drilled, I can make the wire armatures for the mushroom creatures. I drilled a few extra holes because I'm not totally sure how close I need to place the mushrooms so that they look clustered and a little bit cramped, but so you can still see them well. And now I need to enlist a couple extra hands to help me drill in the hanger on the back. Right like that. Okay, go. Light it up. Teamwork. Good job, husband. Good job. I have the base pretty much done now, so I can move on to sculpting out the mushrooms. Did you know the oyster mushroom actually has a dark side? In the wild, they typically live on dead wood, so they have limited access to all of the nutrients they need. Over time, they have developed a carnivorous appetite to satiate them. They use trickery, attracting their choice prey, nematodes, by emitting aromatic chemicals that offer these creatures the promise of an enticing dinner. The mushroom murder weapon of choice? The sticky knob, a structure that grows on their hyphae and is full of poison. Upon contact with these lollipops of death, the nematodes are paralyzed and then killed.
The mushroom proceeds to inject their hyphae into the corpses, dissolving and absorbing the remaining slurry that is left.
I made a total of 5 mushrooms that will have a variety of facial expressions. Next, I need to consult my reference mushrooms again to look at how they grow together. I now need to sculpt them into the base so they look like they're growing out of the wood. And finally, I can cut the armature wires on the back and finish up those details as well. It's time to work on the eyes for my creatures. I design them first using Photoshop, then I print them out and adhere them to glass cabochons using UV resin. Once the eyes get their final curing under the UV light, I can move on to the little mushy arms. I should probably refer to them as tentacles rather than arms because that's more what they actually look like. And after I finish everyone's appendages, I can start my favorite part, which is sculpting in the eyes and finalizing their facial details. Now let's go meet the mushrooms! First up, we have Cranky Carl the curmudgeon, but I might be mad too if someone's head was always in my face. Then we have Chipper Chad, who's totally stoked all the time. On the lower left, we have Peering Polly, who's swinging wide to get a good look. Front and center, we have Scaredy Sam, who is either shocked by you looking at it or its own existence, I can't really tell. Lastly, we have Good Time Gabe, who's, well, what else can I say? Having a good time. And that's the cast, folks. I had a lot of fun giving everyone different expressions and capturing different moods. It took so much work to get here. I was really nervous the entire time. I wasn't sure if it was gonna work out, but I think it did. It's looking pretty good, and I think it's ready to paint. The first step is putting masking fluid on the eyes to make cleaning paint off of them much easier. Then I prime the sculpture with gesso. First, I'll be painting the base, and then I'll paint the mushroom creatures. I'm starting with a brown base coat. Then I consult my reference again and start building up the colors. My favorite paints to use are these golden acrylic paints. I just love the way my sculptures look after using them with such a deep and vibrant color. You can find links to all my favorite materials that I use in the description below. Once the base is finished, it's time to check out my mushroom references again for their paint job. Another interesting fact about oyster mushrooms is that scientists and ecologists have discovered they could be helpful in removing pollutants and waste from the environment. The process is called mycoremediation, and many types of mushroom varieties are being tested for this. As decomposers in the ecosystem, fungi and mycelia produce enzymes that break things down and turn them into nutrients. While most commonly it's things like wood, leaves, and other plants, we're learning that they can add pollutants, waste, plastic, and more now to the list. And once we finish painting, that means it's time for satisfying eye peels. Ooh, ah, ah, oh, oh. Ooh. The last thing I realized that I want to add is some moss on the bark. When I went on a hike in the middle of making this sculpture, I noticed that almost all the wood on the trees and fallen logs was definitely covered in some amount of it. And that's it, the family of oyster mushroom creatures is complete. Thank you so much for watching, and please let me know how you think it turned out in the comments below. Also, feel free to share any ideas about what my next magical creature should be. Please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any of my future videos.